everybody. I'm Caryn Hartglass. You're listening to It's All About Food. Great program today. I have two guests with me, Dr. Michelle Perro and Dr. Stephanie Seneff. We're going to be talking about Girl Scout cookies, and we're probably going to delve into some other food-related items, I have a feeling. But let's just jump right in. I recently read an article that you had authored, and we could talk about that. Danger in the Dough. Great title. Who thought of that?
Michelle, right?
Well, I was a literature major in college, so I do enjoy delving back into my literary roots.
Okay, so most people know about Girl Scouts, love the whole Girl Scout thing. It's kind of hard to resist our adorable neighbors, little girls, and our relatives and not buy cookies from them, right? And it's kind of a big business too, I think. It makes them a lot of money and helps support their activities and probably pays some hefty salaries of some administrators at the very top. So just tell me about what you wanted to talk about in this article and how that all got started.
Okay, well, I'll get the ball rolling and then Stephanie, my dear friend and colleague, can jump in. So this was inspired by a twofold event, and one of them was the work of Zen Honeycutt, our fellow podcaster, Moms Across America president, amazing cheerleader for children's health rights, not to mention other great causes.
We've had her on this podcast numerous times.
Well,
Excellent.
we can't say enough about our friend Zen. Anyway, she had done a school lunch study that she published back in 2022 on 43 American school lunches. Long story short, all 43 lunches across the US were positive for toxic metals. And so couple that with information that I had learned about undeclared mercury in infant formula from a process with high fructose corn syrup, which is most infant formulas, which we studied last year in May, when published May of 2024. They also, 40 samples also contain toxic metals, all of them, for lead and aluminum. So what does that have to do with the cookies? Well, we are champions of the organic regenerative movement. That's what we've been fighting for, that our kids should have real food, nutrient-dense food, food free from chemical additives. Hence, another colleague of ours said, hey, what about the Girl Scouts, the iconic cookies? So we decided to study them, both for the 5 toxic metals the FDA only studies 4, and for glyphosate and its nasty end product, a byproduct called AMPA. Long story short, we have 2 labs that looked at them, 2 accredited fabulous labs, and we found all the cookies were contaminated with glyphosate and AMPA, and they all contain toxic metals in various levels and degrees, with aluminum being the worst, actually. Not a benign metal, not often tested, but not benign. It's a neurotoxicant. We can talk about that later. And that's how it all started. We were not intending to take down the Girl Scouts. We were all Girl Scouts. We love the Girl Scouts.
You too.
Exactly.
And so we invited the Girl Scouts prior to the release of this information to join us and to begin to source their ingredients over process. It wasn't going to happen overnight, to begin to include real organic ingredients. Not that cookies are a health food, Caryn. We're not talking that this is, well, these are
no, but if we're going to have a treat, we don't want to have unnatural toxins in food.
That's all we were asking. And hence, I'll make it short so we can get into conversation. That's how it was all birthed. The Girl Scouts didn't respond to us, but we are still joyfully, happily willing to collaborate with them because they do make quite a bit of money in this endeavor that started literally in the the Girl Scouts started in 1913, but I think the cookies started in 1917 in Oklahoma. We've been doing bake sales for a million years. Every school mom knows about the bake sale. So, but the Girl Scouts, these ladies were entrepreneurial, loved their spirit, and that was a super quick overview of how this all was birthed.
So I'm not surprised to hear that all of these toxins are in Girl Scout cookies. Why? Because I'm passionate about food and I'm following all the food news, and I've talked to Zen Honeycutt before, and I've read all the articles about glyphosate in wheat and oats and the tests done on children's cereal foods. And so it's only logical that they'd be in the cookies too, right? If they're not organic and they're in the grains, they're going to be in the cookies.
Right.
I remember you must have seen maybe the film The Need to Grow.
I'm
No.
not.
Have you heard of it?
No.
Oh, you're
Have
going to
you?
want to. It may help you.
I'm writing it down, Caryn. I'm writing it
It
down.
may help you get through to the Girl Scouts, because this was a documentary in 2019. I think you can see it free just about anywhere. It might even be on Netflix. I'm not quite sure. But it follows 3 stories. And one story is about a guy who was doing urban farming, and it was, I think, in Los Angeles. None of these stories really had happy endings, unfortunately, because the guy did great things and then he lost the area to farming. And now he's moved on to other things. And another one was this genius, I forget his name, but he had come up with this method to, like, a closed loop invention to create all kinds of green nourishment for plants and also generate electricity. And it was a great thing. And then somehow it all burned. And, you know, we wonder if it was arson or not, but that was one of the stories. And then the other story was about an 8-year-old Girl Scout. And she didn't like the ingredients in the cookies.
Oh, wow.
And she was trying to reach out to the president of the Girl Scouts at the time. And I forget where they live, but they actually went, is the center in New York? I think she went to New York.
We know that story. We've heard that unfortunate story, and we actually try to reach out to her. Well,
okay, well, that was part of that film.
Because I think she was an adorable little girl, and they kind of rudely dismissed her and never
They
met
absolutely
her.
did. That's right. Yeah.
The Girl Scouts have such an opportunity here, because at this particular moment in time, when there's so much increasing awareness to the toxicity of food, for them to become the messenger who helps people to realize it's such a tremendous opportunity. It would just make everybody really smile to know about Girl Scouts. You know, it's a great move they could make to really turn things around in terms of making their themselves stand out as being a leader in this movement towards fixing our food supply.
Well, personally, I think it's up to women to solve the problems of the world today. And I think the Girl Scouts are a great place to start. And what's the mission behind the Girl Scouts? It's to empower them to do good things and to be leaders.
It's perfect. It's a perfect match.
It's perfect. And, you know, it's their tagline is like courage, confidence, you know, entrepreneurship. That is what that's in their own mission statement. This would be in a perfect alignment. But, you know, Zen is the one who came up with some of those salaries. They were easily, discoverable online. It's not
multiple
like
hundreds of thousands of dollars.
That is obscene. Maybe they didn't want that uncovered, but they're a nonprofit. And you also have to look who sits on their board. And maybe they couldn't say anything. But if that's the case, well, then shame on them. You know, and there were other couple things that came up with this, and it's not about just the money, but it is about the money, because these cookies support local troops. I've read anywhere about 20, they get 23% or something. Well, I don't know how that all comes down, because they make, according to a troop leader, I just dug out in my own neighborhood, the Girl Scouts make 65 cents a box. They're sold, and the boxes now are going from $7 to $8 a box. And this information is not discoverable online. I've looked. I got it from a local troop leader. So when someone inquired of me, well, you're not going to help these little local troops, and I said, well, take the $8 and donate it to the local troop. They'll get 10 times the amount of money than if they sold that one box of cookies. Just do
right.
And I think they could easily start small. Like, I think they could do a pilot experiment and just introduce one cookie that's organic, certified organic cookie. We have all these cookies. This one is certified organic. Costs a little more. Buy it if you like, you know, and just sell that one along with the others and see how it does. Because it might really be flying off the shelf. I mean, there may be a lot of people who say, wow, I'm going to buy the organic one. And that'll make them see maybe we should have 2 organic cookies, and it could move up from there.
So
They
I'm
can
a
start
vegan.
small. Yeah.
I'm a vegan, and it took a while, but they finally made a few flavors that are vegan. And gluten-free is a big thing, and they have
Right.
some gluten-free things. So they sort of are responding
Yes.
to what people want, but they're not getting a big message.
And they took out the dyes too, kudos to them. They have made some changes. And the only place when we were sourcing the cookies, we looked at different states because ingredients are sourced locally. And there are 2 bakers that provide the cookies. It's not just one baker. And so that's why we picked different states to look at the cookies. And then only in California could we track down the gluten-free cookies. So I think, and in different states, they use different names, regional names, like New Orleans. We got some cookies from New Orleans and they had some very kind of Southern fun names.
Huh.
So there was some fun stuff. So they are responsive to cultural and locational demands, not to mention vegans and removing dyes. And that's good, but it's not enough because our kids are sick and they're really sick. So if you want to be part of the solution, then jump on board. And we are asking the iconic Girl Scouts to join us and march to the FDA, which we've done. We've been in the FDA, USDA, we've been in all those offices. Interesting sidebar. And that's what we're asking for. That's the ask. This is not just, oh, here's our data, oh, well. It's like, no. This is actionable. This is solutions based. We want to see change based on information. Otherwise, why bother?
Okay, so you've mentioned these toxins that are in the cookies. Can you just briefly talk about what they can do to our health, especially children's health?
Stephanie, why don't you
We
start?
can start with glyphosate because I think glyphosate is, I think glyphosate may even be a part of the reason why the metals are in there, because glyphosate is a very powerful metal binder. It binds all these +2 cations, and many minerals that are important to our health get chelated by glyphosate and become unavailable. Even the gut microbes get sick because they can't get at the manganese. So, and I wrote a paper that showed that glyphosate, I'm a collaborator on a paper that talked about glyphosate chelating aluminum. 2 glyphosate molecules wrap around an aluminum atom and hide its +3 charge. It makes this small, uncharged molecule that can easily cross over the gut barrier. Usually aluminum stays in the gut and goes out through the feces. We're really good at keeping it out, but the gut barrier gets unhealthy in response to glyphosate. There's papers that show that. So it's easier to get things across. And when you have an uncharged molecule, it can easily go across the gut into the blood, go up to the brain, hit the pineal gland, which is outside of the blood-brain barrier, and cause a lot of damage. I mean, aluminum in the pineal gland is not a good thing. And there's clear evidence associating it with things like Alzheimer's disease. And so I think that's very worrisome that glyphosate helps to get the aluminum, not only, in the product, but then across the barriers. And that, so the aluminum becomes much more toxic in the presence of glyphosate, which is there in the cookie as well. And so these are all very concerning things. Glyphosate is a sleeper because people have been heralding it as a fantastic solution for growing crops. It's so important to our agriculture that we can't live without it. And in fact, Monsanto is now, or Bayer is now working hard on the states. There's something like 21 states that they've been trying to put legislation in there that would basically give glyphosate the same kind of privileges that vaccines have, and possibly even better than what vaccines have. Because there wouldn't be a glyphosate court. There would just be, like we have a vaccine court that can go through the government and possibly get some compensation for vaccine injury. Glyphosate injury, forget it. This law that they're trying to pass, they're working at the federal level and they're also working in individual states. Bayer is working really hard to argue that glyphosate is so essential for our agriculture that we're going to all starve if we don't have it. And therefore, we can't afford not to have it. And therefore, if somebody comes down with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in their 30s because they've been using lots of glyphosate, forget it. You're not going to get any compensation. Hopeless.
Well, obviously, that's in response to the cases that they've lost and that they've had to pay into for people proving that their non-Hodgkin's lymphoma was related to glyphosate exposure.
That's absolutely right. In fact, they've been saying now, and I think they may have already done it, they were talking about doing getting glyphosate out of Roundup that's supplied to the residential market. They say the food is fine because farmers can't sue because they've got so many other chemicals they're exposed to. You can never blame the glyphosate on their illnesses. So they don't worry about the farms. They only worry about the residential population to say, okay, good, we got glyphosate out of the Roundup that you're going to use to kill your dandelions.
And isn't part of the problem that the tests done on glyphosate haven't been done in like a real world scenario with
Absolutely.
interactions with other chemicals that they work with, which make it
Absolutely.
worse? Yeah.
Oh, yes. In fact, Seralini was a researcher he's still active in France, and he published many papers with his team showing that not only is glyphosate much less toxic without those active ingredients that are other ingredients that are additives to the Roundup formulation. Those ingredients make glyphosate much more readily able to get into the cells, and those ingredients are toxic in and of themselves. And they've never been studied. So they only studied, it's really weird. The industry only studied glyphosate in isolation to see if it was toxic in animal studies. And then
I don't think it's weird. I
and
think
they
there
only studied
might
the
be some
GMOs.
intention there.
Well,
I
the
mean,
amazing thing is,
firstly, it's
well,
easier
of
to test
course,
one thing instead of many variables, but
no, I
maybe
agree with
they
you. They
knew.
probably knew that it would be much more toxic if they had. I'm sure they knew that, and so they're trying to avoid proving, showing the toxicity. But they also, when they study the GMO, I was really amazed to find that when they studied the GMO crops, they introduced this genetic mutation in the crop, and it protects it from glyphosate. And they studied it to see if it was toxic, and they grew it organically in those studies. They didn't add any glyphosate to it. So, I mean, very clever. It's a good way to hide the fact that these things are toxic, right?
Well, there is a piece of good news. There is a colleagues of ours who did a study several years ago based on a Shime device, and it basically simulates our gut from the mouth to the tush. And so then they had just plain gut, then they had gut with just glyphosate, and then they had gut with Roundup. And then they had a gut where they put in spores, which are a type of microbes that can rebalance and heal the gut. And they found that Roundup was more toxic than glyphosate to the microbiome. And when they put those spores in, and they're called spore biotics, if people want to consume them, it's basically microbes found in soil, if you want, they could even reverse some of this toxicity. And so I kind of like, rather than waiting for the end Broadway moment, is like, can we reverse this? Yeah, we can, because microbes that we're killing off, because glyphosate is an antibiotic. Thank you, Monsanto Bayer, 2008, 2010 patent. They know it's an antibiotic. It's not like we're saying stuff that like we're so brilliant. They knew it. Look at their patent parade. I learned that from David Martin during the pandemic. Look at the patents. So this is sort of, we are eating an antibiotic, and the killing off of the microbiome is probably one of the biggest drivers for poor health. And there are many things that kill off the microbiome, but glyphosate and its toxic end product there, AMPA, and there are others too, are devastating to the microbes which make up our gut health. It's a huge colony of organisms. It's one of the largest organs in our body, if you consider an organ itself. And among the many toxic effects of glyphosate, it's up there.
Yeah, actually, it's really interesting to go further with that, because in my book, Toxic Legacy, I wrote the book Toxic Legacy: How the Weed Killer Glyphosate is Destroying Our Health. And in that book, I dove deep into the gut. I spent so many hours reading papers on the gut. I was determined to figure it out, and I feel like I did. And in fact, it's quite a simple story, really. Glyphosate raises the pH of the gut, in part because it interferes with the breakdown of proteins. The proteins get into the colon, and the microbes turn it into ammonia. And ammonia is very basic, and so the pH goes up. When the pH is high, the acid-loving bacteria don't thrive. And those are the guys that make the short chain fatty acids, and they're absolutely essential for the health of the colon. So we have this increase in inflammatory bowel disease, which is going up exactly in step with glyphosate usage, and also colon cancer, which is also going up dramatically. And these things are being caused, I think, by the lack of the short chain fatty acids that are so essential as a primary fuel for the colonocytes. So this is a very simple story, really. It raises the pH, which causes this disruption. Now you get these pathogens overgrowing, and the good guys don't thrive. And then you get this imbalance in the metabolites, and you get these toxic metabolites that are produced by the pathogens. And so you not only don't have the healthy metabolites, but you have the toxic ones that are causing trouble. And so you get the leaky gut barrier. You get a lot of huge problems in your gut, just as a consequence of chronic glyphosate exposure.
And can I just tag on there, Caryn, why this is so crucial, what Stephanie just said? And because I'm a pediatrician, I focus on babies. I love babies. Who doesn't love babies? That babies need bifidobacteria.
Absolutely.
Glyphosate takes out bifidobacteria. Bifido thrives in an acidic environment. Bifido is one of the key drivers that produces those short chain fatty acids, which then you need for brain health. Without those short chain fatty acids, brain health goes way down. So literally, if mom from birth is breastfeeding and she doesn't have an organic diet, it's passing right into the breast milk. Additionally, if the baby's formula fed, we hope not, but yes, we know that a significant number of American babies are formula fed. By 6 months, half of them are formula fed, that they're getting it in the formula. There's glyphosate and toxic metals, which we showed in the infant formula, which I'm
Mhm.
literally working on that screen right now here in California regarding that mess of infant formula. But I digress from the cookies, but this is why, Stephanie, myself, and many of us, you, Caryn, are so passionate about this. We know why our kids are sick. And now we
Mhm.
are forcing industry to change by alerting every cookie loving American out there,
Mhm.
probably globally, to push these organizations to make a significant change for our kids.
Okay, so obviously glyphosate is bad. And there are other toxins that are in our food that are also very dangerous. But you're focusing on Girl Scout cookies. And the reason for that is
Mhm. I think it's just because the Girl Scouts they have a hope to actually become a leader in this messaging around eating certified organic. I think they could
so
really do a tremendous job of getting the population to be aware of these
the ultimate
problems.
message is not just the cookies, right? It's our food
Right.
system. It's our failed food system.
It's our failed food system, and we went as far to create a regenerative organic badge that the Girl Scouts could win. Instead of getting 5G badges, which is
Mhm.
now in the Girl Scouts, we said, hey, so our lovely team member, producer, Ann Temple made us a beautiful badge that we said, here you go, Girl Scouts. Look, we even designed the badge for you. This is a bigger message. And the Girl Scouts
Mhm.
are so powerful, and we support their mission statement. It's not just girls, it's boys, their families to promote. They could be behind, they could be a huge game changer influencer in this conversation. And that's what we're looking to do. And that's why we're saying, hey, get on board with the cookies. But teaching girls, boys, children about nutrient-dense food and organics from the beginning. And it can be included in the Girl Scout curriculum.
Absolutely. I would love a badge like that.
Me too. Love badges.
And they could also do it in their cooking. You can get badges for cooking, and they could work that into the organic as well to sort of cook different
Yeah.
recipes, completely certified organic.
I remember when I was a young Girl Scout, one of the cooking things that I did was we made a white sauce with some flour and a fat. And, we didn't make that kind of thing at home, but I learned how to make it in Girl Scouts. And I don't know that that was the best thing to learn, but that was a long time ago.
I think I learned how to tie knots also. That was a big fun.
Definitely not. Yeah,
Yes, I think that
we
one
did
was
the
an easy
knots,
badge.
right?
Not the nut
Yeah,
badge.
we all
I
did
got the
nuts.
nut badge, yeah.
Okay. So let's say I know someone who's selling cookies, and I do. What do I say? Do I say, I don't want the cookies, but I'll give you a donation for your troop? Is that the best thing to do?
Yes, tell them why you don't want the cookies, Karen. Say, listen, there's some research that these organic contains pesticides. This is not new news. The heavy metals and the toxic metals, we're making the invisible visible, as one of our dear friends, Dr. Fagan, has promoted. But what we're saying is give that troop the money. Give them 20 bucks. Give them 50 bucks if you can afford it. Support your local Girl Scout troops, but just say we can't buy the cookies. We're standing behind the mission to organic. Send that message upstairs. Let those troop leaders, knock on the door of the upstairs chain of command and force the issue. That's what we're going to have to do. They're not doing it on their own. We're
Yeah.
going to have, as moms, consumers, educators, as you said initially, Karen, women are driving this movement because what do women care about? Health and education. Here we are. And so we're going to have to force the issue. And this could be the influencing a game changer that we've been looking for. The other industries have made changes because there's an economic tipping point. When different groups go organic, it seems to tumble in place. Other products follow along. And there are now Girl Scout copycats coming along. And now
Mhm.
there are Girl Scout copycat home recipes that are popping up.
Oh, I've created a few.
So if
Mhm.
the Girl Scouts aren't careful, somebody else is going to step in and do their job. So we're saying, step up, Girl Scouts, and we're here to, and if they do it, we will support them. Social media, articles, podcasts, we're right there with them. So this could be a win-win opportunity.
So your article, Danger in the Dough, came out in December, I think. And have you had any communication with Girl Scout troops since that article? It's relatively new.
Oh, troops or the Girl Scout hierarchy, the lead?
Just troops.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we've got some emails, and most of them have been around shock and horror. Like, are you kidding? Most of them have felt tremendous remorse, and some of them were like, "Who did your testing? Or why
Mhm.
wasn't it peer reviewed? You
Yeah.
know,
Hmm.
and how come you only tested 25 cookies?" And you know, Caryn,
Right.
it's expensive. We
I
had to
know.
pool our own monies and had a little
Sure.
bit donations to support the testing. We paid for it. And as we answer these emails, and I do a lot of the email answering, and I said, go ahead and test them. We invite you. We gave our
Prove us wrong. Hmm.
Prove us wrong.
prove
Absolutely.
us wrong. And if I'll eat the darn cookie if we're wrong. Well, the gluten-free cookie. But so it's like, please go ahead. Anyone, any citizen scientist can do this testing. And so, well, Stephanie is a scientist. I'm a physician. Zen is just a jack of I should say a
An
Joanne of
activist,
trades, a
An
Joanne of all
activist.
trades,
a super activist. Hmm.
Yes.
activist, advocate. I like advocate. And so we're saying join in, and you do the testing as well,
I
because
can tell you, my friend Tony Mitra in Canada. He's born in India, but he's a Canadian citizen. He worked for many, many years harassing the Canadian government to get them to test all kinds of different foods for glyphosate. And he finally succeeded, and they tested over 8,000 different samples from Canadian, goods, imports from US or imports from Mexico, from Europe. They did all these different ingredients, and he produced a book called Poison Foods of North America out of that data. They gave the data to him, and he analyzed it, and he presented his results in this book, Poison Foods of North America. And it was amazing. And so I looked at all the numbers, and I communicated with him. We had some podcast interviews, and it's really great that Canada did that. And it's also very, very revealing, because the highest levels came in foods from Canada and the United States. Mexico came in right in line with Europe, which was much lower, overall much lower. And there were some surprises in there, because I hadn't realized that garbanzo beans and chickpeas, legumes, sorry,
Yeah.
all those really healthy foods are actually loaded with glyphosate.
Yeah.
They had some of the highest levels.
Yeah.
And so Canada, is revealing this information. What about the US? I mean, as far as I know, we almost never test anything for glyphosate. And we finally, one year when Anthony Sampson and I were studying it, I think it was 2012, they did a test on soybeans. And they tested 300 samples of soybeans, and 95% of them had glyphosate. And so that was like, okay, fine, we've done the test, we're done. I mean, but come on, right? We need to know which foods, because I think if people are trying to be smart about shopping, and if they find out that a certain food, never has glyphosate in it, well, why don't I just buy that? I don't need to worry about organic if it doesn't have it. I mean, of course, there's other things that could be in there that are toxic, but as far as glyphosate is concerned, I would like to know which foods I need to absolutely avoid. When I go out to the restaurant, don't order that. And so, so I think the US government is really shirking on their responsibilities. Their attitude is glyphosate is safe, no amount is toxic. We know it's all over the food supply. We don't care. I mean, that's their attitude, which is really cavalier and very irresponsible.
Okay, let's take a step away from glyphosate for a moment and talk about aluminum, arsenic, cadmium, lead, mercury, because your products that you tested also were high on these heavy metals, these toxins.
I was really surprised, actually, because I guess naively, I just thought that they would mostly not have any. I don't actually understand where it's coming from. Those things are natural. And so maybe they're, it crossed my mind that maybe that's just what you have in a natural situation. Some things are just natural and they're just in there and you didn't do anything wrong in the manufacturing. It's a possibility, but I don't believe it because all of these metals are toxic. There's nothing about them that's good. You have a lot of minerals, like iron and zinc and copper that can be toxic in high amounts, but they're also
Absolutely.
essential. And so those need to be, the body knows how to manage those very cleverly, and often the chemicals mess that up. But those are a different class, because these metals that were in there are all very toxic and have no good side, nothing good about them in biology.
Well, we know that maybe in the United States and outside of the United States in some developing nations, there are pollutants that leach into the soil and leave high levels of lead and cadmium. And we've heard quite a bit about it with respect to chocolate. And it made big news with chocolate. Now, I don't know if it stopped people from buying chocolate, but for like a week or two, people were nervous.
Well, we use a lot of let's say for arsenic, right? Super toxic. It was in pesticides, and the Southeast contaminated, and especially in areas where they grow rice. Well, it's hard to imagine we grow rice in the U.S., but we do. And a lot of it's from leftover pesticides.
Yeah.
So there are reasons where these toxic metals could be coming from the manufacturing process, and we say toxic metal and not heavy metals because of the weight. Arsenic is not heavy by weight. So that's why we're saying toxic metals, but all 5 of those metals we tested were toxic. Aluminum was in the 1,000 range plus higher than the other metals. The FDA doesn't even test aluminum because it is so ubiquitous in our environment. And yes, there is some aluminum naturally in soil, but it comes from a lot of geoengineering. They drop it on us, and it's been declared accurate as per 3,000 pages just released by ICANN 1 week ago by the United States Air Force, that they are indeed dropping aluminum, strontium, different gadolinium, titanium, and other things on us. Mount Shasta, where I'm here in California, has one of the highest amounts of aluminum I think in California, and those people are so sick. And so it's time to pull back, the Band-Aids, or rip it off. Let's see the wound, check the wound. And aluminum is a neurotoxicant. There are papers showing the links to autism, the links to Alzheimer's. And right now in California, 1 in 22 kids is on the autism spectrum. Alzheimer's is one of the leading neurodegenerative diseases of adults. So what are we doing except poisoning our youth and our elderly? And not so elderly, unfortunately, because there are some reports of teens with Alzheimer's. If you I read a paper. I mean, it's just shocking. So that's where those metals will come from. But what little data exists is that they don't study the metals collectively. In infant formula, there were like 3 papers showing negative synergism, meaning when those metals are together, they're more toxic. And when kids are nutrient deficient, particularly in iron, zinc, and selenium and copper, those metals, toxic metals, are even more toxic. Sometimes higher nutrient levels can offset toxicity. And we know, as per Zen's testing of school lunches, kids are receiving suboptimal nutrient levels, overfed, undernourished. That's clear.
Okay, I never understand how other people think. Outside of my own head, that's the only thing I know I understand. I don't know how either of you think. I don't know how anyone thinks, but I still find it really hard to believe why people aren't outraged about any of this. Is it because they don't know, or they don't want to know?
I know, for me, just the fact that we have all this autism, it just amazes me that it's not a national crisis, that the government isn't investing every dime they can come up with in trying to figure out what's causing this epidemic. They're kind of like, well, oh yeah, we've got all this autism, but so what? I mean, not really important. I mean, how can it not be important when you have all these disabled kids that are going to become disabled adults, and then we're going to have a whole new crop of disabled kids? I mean, when I think of 30 years from now, the future looks grim.
And I agree. This ennui, this kind of, apathy toward chronic disease. It's like, and where sick is the new normal, that we've embraced it. Oh, it's part of it. No, it's not part of it. You know, the kids on the spectrum, you know, on neurodiversity, sure, but those kids have a lot of abnormalities in their microbiome and their neurotransmitters and their immune function. They have significant health challenges. And I read a recent paper, they have higher rates of cancer. So it's not like this is a physiologic normal status, although we are embracing neurodiversity, right? So this like when I heard some of the Girl Scout negative comments regarding our studies, like, "Are you taking down the Girl Scouts?" That's like, you're protecting the Girl Scouts over protecting our children eating the contaminated cookies. Where are your priorities? You know, autism is an original pandemic. Let's just talk epidemic. By definition, epidemic is under 1 in 100. We are for years under 1 in 100. So we have an epidemic in the US of autism, and that must be addressed. And that's why we are staunch supporters of Mr. Kennedy, who championing this you know, MAHA movement, that we moms, we scientists, we physicians, and of course podcasters like yourself are standing behind to get to the root cause and fix it, because autism is treatable. Mainstream says it's not. For those of us who practice integrative medicine like myself, it's reversible.
I have a different opinion of RFK Jr. than you two, and I have a lot of concerns, but I would like to see significant changes in our food system, however that can happen.
There is no, it's going to have to be driven in a broader sense. There's no knight in a white horse, you know, that was sort of a fairy tale. And, but at least we are having the conversation, whether you like Mr. Kennedy or don't. But for the first time in our political memory, I can see none of us are 21 years old. We've been around a while, that this conversation has not happened before, despite these issues being present through my career. I've been practicing 43 years. This is the first time I'm hearing this, where we're really examining the etiology, the root causes of systemic chronic disease in America.
Well, we'll see what happens there. Now, back to these metals, because I understand with glyphosate, we don't have to use it. We can grow organically. But with these metals that are in the soil, is there a way to avoid getting them in our food? I know that I talked to one chocolate manufacturer, and he has a small company, and he's trying to work with his providers of cocoa beans to do a variety of different things to keep the lead and cadmium out. And it's not easy.
That's what I was afraid of.
Yeah, there's something called phytoremediation, where you can actually use plants, planting certain areas to clear the heavy metals, because plants will take them up. And then we have to figure a way how to remove those plants, not eat those plants, and get them to remove the soil. There are other things that will remove heavy metals in the soil, are microbes. Microbes, the utilization of certain microbes will take up heavy metals also. So that is microbial remediation. That's another way to do it. And using other binders in the soil, like humic and fulvic acid, you know, or using various types of spirulina and chlorella to bind up the metals and then remove those out. Various herbs can take out, like cilantro and parsley. So we can use these different things as part of phytoremediation to kind of decrease the toxic load, and perhaps it would stop spraying us for a minute, you know, where we can, you know, regain our agricultural health. So these are ways, there are ways. I'm not saying they're easy, but it has to be done because we have to protect the neurological well-being of our citizens.
Okay, so what I'm getting out of this with respect to Girl Scout cookies is to not buy them, share your article and information with the Girl Scout that's selling the cookies, and make a donation to their troop. Now, I just want to jump to some other subjects just because you know so much. You mentioned breast milk. And I think most of us know that if we have a child, breast milk, the mother's breast milk is the ideal milk for the child. And sometimes there are complications and a formula is necessary. But you did some serious research, and that was also quite scary about what's in some of the formulas, not all of the formulas. And I'm curious, after you did that work, what came out of that?
Okay, so the new MDs, that's our podcast, Mothers, Docs, and Scientists, that we've been doing for the past couple of years. And we tested 40 formulas, 20 all, 2 for each, we're choosing formulas, organic and conventional, local and abroad, really focusing those formulas which contain high fructose corn syrup. High fructose corn syrup is an ultra-processed ingredient. So infants at birth are fed ultra-processed foods. Just let's be clear. So actually looking for mercury based on the work of Dr. Renee Joy Dufault. That's how I started it. I started the project, and Stephanie and Zen and I were partners in infant formula crime and did the research. And so so we chose those formulas, the kind you get at Walmart, Costco, Amazon. We picked the leading brands. It's an oligopoly. Okay, there are only 4 producers of infant formula, and they control it. And so we picked these formulas, and we tested 40 samples of dry powder in a highly accredited lab, all that stuff. And they were all positive for lead and aluminum, and significant numbers for mercury, arsenic, and cadmium. Like 57% had mercury, 30% had cadmium. I mean, so now the other amounts, other than aluminum, parts per billion, aluminum was in parts per million. Now, what they don't tell you is, I talked about the negative synergism, but that's babies' only food. So if they're getting so much, and they're drinking 32 ounces of that every day for the first 6 months of their life until solids are introduced, it's cumulative. Babies are born with a neonatal leaky gut. That gut closes up from colostrum. If babies aren't fed breast milk, they don't receive colostrum. And we're not adding it to infant formula, though we should. I had never understood why we don't, but we don't. And so they have a neonatal physiologic leaky gut. And so, to Stephanie's point earlier, right, glyphosate is in those formulas, especially the non-organic ones. So they're binding up, neutralizing that aluminum in parts per million, crossing the leaky gut. If there's a leaky gut, there's a leaky blood-brain barrier right into the baby's brain. And glyphosate shuttles aluminum 6 different ways across the blood-brain barrier. When those metals enter the brain, they are very difficult to remove. What those metals can do is they cause a neuroinflammation. There are little immune cells in the brain called microglial cells. When those get activated, those can trigger a whole host of neuroinflammatory conditions. And it's hard to undo that. Doable, but not so easy, and not in the mainstream medicine handbook. Pediatricians have no idea to do this. Actually, everything we're talking about, most pediatricians have no idea what we're talking about. So this is one of the biggest issues.
I was reading around, and I wasn't sure of the conclusion, but if a mother isn't eating healthfully or isn't eating organic, there are some of these toxic items in the breast milk, but not as concentrated as in the formulas, or do you know?
It depends on the diet of the mother, obviously. And so Zen Honeycutt actually tested a number of samples of breast milk for glyphosate. She got samples from various friends, in this mom's network. And they sent it off to get tested, and 1/3 of them came out positive for glyphosate in the breast milk. And these were people who were being very conscientious about their health. They were trying to eat well. So probably the general population is worse. And what's interesting, actually, is that the industry balked. They followed up with that, and they quickly got a study out, a peer-reviewed study. I think it looked at cow's milk, and it said, oh, no glyphosate in cow's milk. But the first thing they did was to precipitate out the proteins. And then they tested what was left over, and the proteins contained the glyphosate. So I think and Anthony Samsel, who's an expert chemist that collaborated with me on several papers, he said he thinks they blew it. They intentionally blew it by taking out the proteins and then testing the rest, taking out the glyphosate with the proteins.
How did they justify that?
They just said, this is what we did. They just reported in the paper, this is what we did.
We're cheating. This is what we did. We cheated, and here are our results.
Yeah, and so they said Zen's wrong. There is no glyphosate in milk.
Okay, so the babies are born, and they're not given the best of all possible worlds in terms of nutrition, and they're struggling, and then they get a little older, and then they eat Girl Scout cookies.
Well, then it hence begins. If now we know we're trying to promote Baby Food Safety Act, both in Congress here in my own state of California, it was passed. They dropped off infant formula. That's the bill I'm pushing right now. I'm meeting with one of our local legislators next week to try and get infant formula back in the bill that they dropped off. So California has done pretty well with this. So according to the Baby Food Safety Act, a Baby Food Act, it's not called Safety Act, Baby Food Act here in California that was passed last year, companies now have to test for toxic metals.
Good.
And so that creates awareness. And it really drives, they don't want to be the one with the highest lead level. They have to produce their results for consumers. So this creates consumer awareness. Right now, there is a bill in Congress called the Baby Food Safety Act, but they didn't include infant formula. And I think that's being driven maybe
That's
by
stupid.
Cory Booker or other people. So there's this willfulness not to reveal, not to clean up our baby's food supply. It's like, are you kidding? So children are being assaulted literally at birth, prenatally, if mom is not eating well or doesn't have means. But even if mom has SNAP, which is the supplemental income that you can get for you can go to and use those coupons at farmers markets. So, but it's not great. On WIC, which is 4 different companies that sell to WIC, it's really weird. States bid for WIC. Mary Nessel did a piece on it today. She's a nutritionist. And
She's been on this show so many times. I love her.
So I love her too, until she said today that all infant formulas are the same.
Uh-oh.
That's what she said today.
Oh,
And
she's retired now. Maybe she's not quite on top of things.
And that the FDA does a good job monitoring it. I'm
Oh,
going to
dear.
tell you why that's not true in a second. If you want to know, it's not true.
Yeah.
It's not true. Sorry, FDA. And
Wow.
we were with the FDA telling them this. So hello, FDA, you were there in the room with all of us as we talked to you about this. And so I kind of digress all over the place here, but Caryn, what we'll do might have frustration. So in essence, our regulators are not protecting babies. And now we put the job on parents. So if parents indeed are not, mom is not eating well, and mom offloads a bulk of her toxic metals into the firstborn child. That's why the first kid in the family has the highest rate of autism, by the way, because there is a connection with toxic metals and autism. There's quite a few papers on this. So it's not like what? It's like, yeah, there are.
I'll tell you the aluminum because Dr. Chris Exley did a study on postmortem brains, autistic brains, and he was shocked with how much aluminum he found in those brains, comparable to what you find in Alzheimer's.
I think it was like 25 of 25, if I recall. It was it was like almost like a perfect.
It blew him away, actually. It totally changed his attitude. I mean, he was just like so surprised that there was so much of a strong link between aluminum and autism.
When you're talking about the Girl Scout cookies, you talk about the producers of the cookies, and you mentioned at the beginning of the program that based on the locality, the cookie may be different by the supplier and just by the culture. The 2 biggest kitchens, ABC Bakers and Little Brownie Bakers, have you been able to communicate with them?
I didn't. I don't think any of us did. We didn't reach out to the bakers because the bakers are hired by the Girl Scouts. So, and they just source ingredients as they're directed to do, but the ingredients are sourced locally is what we're learned. And the 2 bakers were different, with one baker producing a slightly healthier cookie than the other baker, but the states were different. Louisiana had the most toxic cookies for sure, which shouldn't surprise anyone since the Mississippi literally just.
That's probably why you picked it, right? Strategically.
No, yes. Mississippi is the sickest state, isn't it?
It's certainly the fattest state. It doesn't have the highest rate of autism, but you got to be careful here. Are they reporting all the autism that exists? I think New Jersey right now has the highest rate, but it changes every year. We picked Iowa. When I did research on that, has the sprays the most pesticides of any state in the U.S. And Iowa just vetoed a bill. Supported a bill, today that is giving a pass to pesticide manufacturers so they can't be sued, to what Stephanie was referring to earlier. Iowa
passed that.
Wyoming said no.
Oh, that's good. Wow, you're on top of it. I don't know the specifics.
We're going to do a podcast on this, Caryn. Stay tuned. We'll send you the clip. Yeah. But so we are battling. The federal government is trying to squash states' rights. And this is what happened with GMO labeling. It happened with vaccines. And we have to really prevent that from taking place in terms of allowing pesticide companies to have a free pass.
Well, I would like the federal government to take the lead and say, we want a healthy country. We want
Well,
healthy
it may do
children.
that. It may do
And
that with Kennedy,
right?
I'll tell you.
Well, however it happens, I certainly hope it happens. That's the cookie story.
I think this whole issue of controlling the top and disenfranchising the bottom is a game that's being played worldwide. Even when you look at the country level, and then these sort of super organizations that are above the country level, and then the country can't even do something because the super organization denies it. And this is what's happening in Europe. Individual countries in Europe are trying to ban glyphosate. And then they say, no, the European Union won't let you do that. They're not allowed to ban glyphosate. It's something that has to be decided at that higher level. And I think that's a game they've been playing across the board. Here in Hawaii, we had individual counties. Each island is a county. And 3 out of the 4 big islands had lawsuits that actually had bills that got passed, despite enormous expenses on the other side, that were, against the industry, sort of restricting the industry in various ways. 3 different counties passed those bills with tremendous opposition from the industry. And then, but the bills all became law, but then they became ineffective because they said, no. You basically get the state government sues the county to say, no, you can't do that. And the law becomes useless. This is really, really, I mean, people work so hard to get these laws passed, and then it's just like gone. It's really, really frustrating.
In our home, we only buy organic. Everything is organic. And I'm not a wealthy person by any means. I don't make very much money, but it's a priority. It's like the #1 priority.
Same here.
And we shop at a variety of supermarkets. I kind of like to support the local organic market, but we do go to Trader Joe's. And yesterday it was weird. It was middle of the week and shelves of organic apples and other things were empty.
Interesting.
And like, what was that about? But in this area where people are more informed, the demand is greater and sometimes the supply just can't meet it.
Yes.
Well, if we wouldn't support conventional farmers, but supported organic regenerative farmers, I mean, remember the farm bills, they support conventional farming. So
Yeah.
if our government supported organic farming, there could be a massive transition. And one of the farmers we work with, his name is Mark Dudla. He's in Wisconsin, great farm, great product.
He's fantastic.
He has shown, no doubt, that organic farmers can supply the need. This concept that we need, glyphosate-based herbicides to feed the planet is not true. That organic regenerative can feed the world. It has. Prior, we've only been eating glyphosate since 1973, GMOs since 1996, 1998. So we existed before the introduction of GMOs and glyphosate. And I would remind you, Caryn, of course, I know you know this about your listeners, is that GMOs are not benign either. And you don't eat, a plant that's genetically modified without associated pesticide. And there is very little data on the toxic effects of GMOs without pesticides on human health. There may be 2 studies. In all these years we've been eating GMOs, and we're eating GMOs based on one Monsanto study.
Which didn't include the glyphosate that's used.
But the first study on GMOs showed harm, gut, reproductive, immunologic, and it was only based on 10 rats. And so when they duplicated that study years later, they said, Dr. Pusti was wrong. He was the original scientist. But what they did was they found harm and they said it wasn't clinically relevant. And that's what they did with other things. What they'll do is they'll find abnormalities and say it's not relevant and discard it. So the devil's in the details. So what Stephanie and I have to do is we have to go dig in the dirt, literally.
It's called cheating.
It's pull a little bit of information out. Sometimes the real data is in the actual paper.
Absolutely.
It's just and most people don't know how to read a scientific paper. They're not scientists. They're not trained.
But also, the industry has set up the rules in order to fail, to find, because this is the whole thing with glyphosate. As I looked into it, when you look back at the point when glyphosate got approved, they designed the studies. They said you do rat studies, you look for 3 months. If you don't see any toxicity after 3 months, you're good to go. Well, it turns out it takes 4 months. And so Seralini did this lifelong study of these rats, and they exposed them to low dose glyphosate for their whole life. 3 months, they were looking good. They didn't seem like they had any problem. 4 months, they started to see trouble. Eventually, they got, kidney problems, liver problems, reproductive issues, massive memory tumors. I mean, lots of things, and early death. But it took time. So, they designed the studies to fail. And they also said if you expose to high doses and you don't see any damage, you don't have to look at lower doses. You can just forget about lower doses. And it turns out the lower doses are more toxic because they start to become endocrine disruptors at low doses. And this is a really interesting, bizarre thing about biology that people don't realize. They were saying the dose makes the poison. As long as it's not toxic at the higher level, forget studying the lower level. They probably set that up because they discovered, my guess is they discovered when they studied the lower level, it was more toxic.
Oops.
They said, we got to get rid of this. How can we do it? Let's make this rule. I mean, I feel like they actually designed the studies to fail.
And, a lot of these people, these scientists have families, they have children, and you wonder, where's the disconnect?
I know. Yeah, it's frustrating.
It's sort of, I didn't learn about cognitive dissonance until COVID, that there can be such a kind of a schism, a schizophrenic schism in people's brains. And so I also saying, even if you can afford organic for your own family, but it's okay for the other families to eat it, what about the social justice piece? Do we not care for our neighbor? Just because I can afford organic, but my neighbor can't, this doesn't sit well with me. My kid is okay, but yours isn't. Where is our sense of morality, of conscience? When is it that Americans don't care for our neighbor?
Me.
We are. I live in Merin, right here, Merin County. So this idea is that we have to take care of each other. And one of the things that my organization is getting into is looking at social justice in terms of food justice in communities that have been underserved. That's where one of the future projects I'm going with after we wrap up Girl Scout cookies. Stephanie, stay tuned because I'm dragging you with this, my friend. But so it's all of us can benefit. I don't want to just see a certain segment of society benefit from the change that is coming. And it's coming because every mama bear has been activated across America.
Well, I think that's a beautiful way to wrap this show up. Michelle Perro, MD, and Stephanie Seneff, PhD. Thank you so much for joining me and for coming out with this very important information, Danger in the Dough. I'll include the link to the article and with this podcast post. Thank you so much for joining me, for everything you're doing, and let's clean up those cookies.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, take care. Everybody have a delicious week.
Okay, thank you for having us.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.